People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. My guest tonight is Dr. Roshan Perera, Senior Research Fellow at the Advocata Institute. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'd like to first discuss, when we talk about macroeconomic stability, one of the low-hanging fruit SMEs, small and medium enterprises. They are the backbone of the economy, the Sri Lankan economy. However, there's a massive issue when it comes to financial inclusion, digitalization, access to financial services. If you could help us understand how to link these elements.
Yeah, so that's a good question, but I'll just take a step back because I think we're all talking about this macro stability or macroeconomic stability. So I think macroeconomic stability is important, and I think the IMF program has put in place some of the the reforms that need to happen to achieve this macroeconomic stability, and we're seeing some of the fruits of that stability in terms of inflation, etc. But I think focusing only on that may not be sufficient because as a country we also need to grow, and we know that even up to the third quarter of 2023, in the third quarter of 2023 we had some positive growth, but I think overall for 2023 we are going to see negative growth. But 2024 we are forecasting, or the central bank has forecast, that the economy will grow by 3%. But even a 3% growth is not going to be sufficient to take the economy to where we want it to be. For one thing, we know that poverty, there are about 30%, give or take. We don't know the exact numbers because we don't have a survey has not been released as yet. But we know it's roughly about 30% of the population is below the poverty line. So if you're going to bring these people out of poverty, you need to have growth. And as you said, I think one of the backbone, in a sense, of economic activity in this country has been the small and medium enterprises, because the informal economy roughly constitutes about 2/3 of the economy. So 60 to 70% at least of employment is in the informal sector, and from that we kind of conclude that or deduce that maybe 60% of the economy is informal. But the issue now that many of these enterprises face is their access to finance, because we had several years of negative growth, particularly in some of the sectors where these informal sector people actually operate, like tourism, etc., have not been able to have declined over the last few years, and it's only this year that we're seeing some growth. So a lot of these businesses have either gone out of business or they are struggling to be able to carry on business. And one of the things that we see as constraint to these businesses even operating or scaling up is the access to finance. But I think there are so many other avenues in terms of these businesses being able to access finance, and I think those are the things that we need to some low-hanging fruit, as you said. And one is, I think, this whole digitalization of the economy, because I think there is a relationship between digitalization of the economy or the potential for digitalization of the economy and how that can enhance financial inclusion and particularly help in these small and medium enterprises getting access to finance.
Dr. Roshan, financial literacy among our citizenry is also not very high. Speak to us about what we can do, if you could identify the problem and potential solutions.
Yeah, so as I said, digital technology has helped to drive a lot of these financial services, but as you said, there are definitely barriers to making these digital services accessible to everyone, and one of the things is actually financial literacy. But if I go beyond that, there is also the digital infrastructure itself,
sure,
which needs to be there for these services to be accessible to everyone. But if you to unlock the potential of these, but if you look at financial literacy, I mean, in this country, because we have fairly good network of banking bank branches, you'll find that I think the statistics say that nearly 80 to 90% of individual people have a bank account.
Right.
But when you look at the usage of these bank accounts, then the statistics become very telling, because you have like only about 1/3 of the population, or 1/3 of those people who have been surveyed, this is based on a survey done by the World Bank, only 1/3 of individuals actually use these bank accounts.
Okay.
So there's a huge difference between being able to having the product versus actually using it, and the behavior of people. So I think the financial literacy is something that has to be improved, and that has to be driven, I think, both from the demand side and the supply. So demand side is you need force people in a sense to use. So use these use their bank accounts. If you look at India, actually, after particularly with COVID, they a lot of the government transfers or the cash payments, which are the transfer payments like Asamuddi or Asfas, was done through the bank account. So people began to start using their bank accounts. So you have to kind of force people to do that. But in order to do that, everybody has to have a bank account.
Right.
And this is the challenge. But India, one thing that they did was they put in place also the digital infrastructure. And one of the keys of that infrastructure is the digital ID. Because when you have a digital, I mean, we do have a national ID, but it's not necessarily a unique ID. There are some, there are duplicates. But if you have a digital ID, there can't be duplicates, because it takes into account your biometrics, which is either your fingerprint or your iris, etc. So that's a unique ID. And based on that unique ID, if everybody can have that digital ID and you open an account, though that account is only for you, and that has a huge potential, because that means, and if government can use that to transfer your, then people start beginning to use their bank accounts, because they're forced to. But also then what happens is it helps to build up a history of that person in terms of their credit history. Because you can, all the transactions can go through. So even your payments for your mobile phone, because everybody has a mobile phone. I mean, most people have mobile phones. Payments for mobile phones can be done through that. Payments for your utility bills can be done through that, and through that you can build a credit history. So even somebody who's, even an informal worker or informal business can build a credit history through that means, which then can feed into some financial institution, and they can use that information to evaluate this person's creditworthiness.
Sure.
So there are a lot of benefits of something like that. So I think this is something that we lack, but which we really need to embrace, and we need to promote.
Are you aware of any attempts being made by the government to bring in such a system that is interlinked and interconnected?
So we have had this digital ID on the table for, I would say, a decade or more. But unfortunately, we have not been able to push it through. And it's unfortunate because when you look at India, which has like 1.4 billion people, they've managed to push this digital ID. We have, 22 million people. We have very good information on birth registries, etc. I mean, those are highly streamlined. So I don't see why we can't, unroll this very quickly. I don't know whether we don't understand the huge benefits that can come out of having this digital ID.
Sure.
So I think that is one thing that we need to do. But apart from that, if you look at, as I said, the usage of these accounts are very low, and I mean, most people do have. So the one is the financial literacy, but the second point is digital literacy, because you can't only have one, you have to also have the digital literacy. And though most people have a phone, maybe it's a feature phone, or some will have smartphones, when you drill down and you try to find out, what do they use these phones for, and there are surveys done to understand that most people actually use it just for social media.
Sure.
So they don't even use it to, send an email or, some function. They don't use it for function. And definitely, very few people use the mobile phone to make payments or to check their bank accounts. So that transformation, that digital transformation needs to be made in the minds of people to move them to start using the phones to access.
When we talk about SMEs not using digitalization in scaling up their business, could you give us an example just to try and understand where the stumbling block lies?
Yeah, so a good example is actually the next one I was going to talk about, this whole thing of the digital infrastructure. One is this whole payments infrastructure.
Okay.
So what we do now is most of our transactions happen through cash.
Okay.
Maybe few people use credit cards and debit cards, but if you go to most vendors, in the informal sector, it is a cash-based economy.
Sure.
But if you look at, as I say, you look at our neighbor India, most transactions go through the banking system.
Right.
Because actually they have put a limit on the limit on cash transactions. You can only do cash transactions up to something like 50,000, and beyond that it has to go through the banking system. But more than that, they have actually encouraged the populace to really use these other digital forms of payment. So you have these QR codes that people use, and the small vendors actually use these QR codes, and so people don't even carry cash. And as a result, the number of transactions have increased dramatically because it's so easy. You just swipe your smartphone or even your feature phone, and you are able to make a payment.
Right.
And even small vendors are able to access, to be able to do business through this means. Here we also have a QR code. I think you've heard of the Lanka QR code, QR system, which was introduced by the central bank. But I was looking up, and somebody sent me this information. It's actually on the central bank, their payments bulletin. We have 350,000 merchants who have actually registered for this Lanka QR code. But I think as of the end of last year or the third quarter of last year, only about less than 200,000 transactions were conducted. So it's even less than the number of merchants.
Sure.
So the use of this medium of exchange or this platform is very low. So the issue is why are people reluctant?
So there is a hesitance to get into something that's unfamiliar and new, which also creates the need for correct information to be given to people, to businesses as well as individuals, right?
Yeah, so exactly. So I think you're right. As I said, it has been both demand driven and supply. So the supply is there, the payment systems are there, but how do you get people into it? And I think people need to start understanding how, I think even traders need to understand that having this system will actually increase their business. There may be fear for being for on tax purposes and things like that, but I think that is a misperception actually, because if you understand how your business can grow if you have these systems, I think that would counter any negatives. And I think recently Sri Lanka has actually signed up, or we've tied up with the Unified Payments Interface in India. Okay. And we're going to allow Indian tourists actually who come to Sri Lanka to use their payment system or these QR codes or payments interface with merchants who are tied up with the Lanka QR code. So hopefully that will start encouraging merchants to understand that they are going to lose out on that business, because Indians don't carry cash.
Right.
They all use it, and that's what they're used to. So you'll lose a business, you lose a transaction, if you don't allow this payment system. So hopefully that will encourage merchants to promote these QR code based transactions, which then will hopefully encourage Sri Lankans also to start using this payments platform.
But the state has a key role to play in bringing in the digital infrastructure on the one hand, and also encouraging people to engage with the new systems, right?
Absolutely. So I think one thing, of course, that we found, again, this study that we did, is the access to, you have to have access to the internet, because obviously it all works, some of it works through the internet. And there are, I mean, we have fairly good networks, but there are some hotspots where, I mean, black spots they call them, where you don't have access to internet.
Okay.
So I think that is one thing that needs to be done. And also then the affordability issue, because the data costs are now going up. So that could be a bottleneck for people to use their phones or internet or whatever to access information and to do these banking transactions online.
Right.
And the other thing is even the cost of devices, because now the device cost is also maybe prohibitive to some people. So I think these are some areas that the government needs to look at how they can yes, taxes, we need to tax and we need to collect taxes, but then also how do we encourage the use of these devices and the internet.
Okay, fantastic. We are in conversation with Dr. Roshan Perera. We go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back.
The People's Platform. TV1. TV for life.
President opens Anuradhapura North water supply project. Farmers march on President's launch demanding fair share. President calls for all to join forces to build the country. Another data scam revealed. Data relating to fuel distribution during crisis deleted. Mahavilachya farmers take to the streets demanding an end to human-elephant conflict. Ex-Minister Ramukwella's court appearance postponed citing ill health.
TV1. TV for life.
Miss Pooja, इसके तो मैं खाड़ी इधर Miss
Pooja Raghu.
Sorry madam, मैं वाला मत बोलता कंदरू है ना करूँ ना अरे आपे गोल्ले तमाय कोई madam आवला की मग आज है madam मैं क्या करन
තවමත් මගේ දෛවය මට නපුරු. අතීතයේ අඳුරු හිමිනලි තාමත් මගේ ජීවිතය අහුමුළු වල තියෙනවා.
ඔයාව කියන තරම් එයාව අන්දන්න රවට්ටන්න ලේසි නෑ. වෙලාවක ඔයාව ඔෆිස් එකෙන් එලවලා දාන්න බැරි.
ඔයා වරදක් කළාද නැද්ද කියලා මම හිතුවට වෙලා. තමන් වරදක් කළාද නැද්ද කියන එක තමන්ට හිතෙන්න.
නීල පබලු අද රාත්‍රී 9ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Vision, Saturday 7:30 p.m.
Mysteries of the Ocean Floor, Sea of Sri Lanka. Saturday at 6:30 p.m. exclusively on TV1. news platform.
Welcome back. We're in conversation with Dr. Roshan Perera, Senior Research Fellow at Vakata Institute. Dr. Roshan, last month, the Microfinance and Credit Regulatory Authority Bill was placed on the order paper of Parliament. Now, it's common knowledge that the microfinance sector is plagued with extortive and predatory practices. How important is it for us to have concrete frameworks that ensure and enable financial protection?
Yes, so I think so the microfinance regulation, I think this was brought in a few years ago, maybe in 2015 or 16. But unfortunately, it's not something that is implementable in a sense, because there are so many microfinance or lending institutions that trying to regulate all those institutions is not going to be very practical. So I think it's on the other side, it's actually helping, again, this financial literacy actually, helping the borrower really to understand and to be able to identify, proper or to get proper lending borrowing practices really, and to be able to understand the terms and conditions that are offered to them.
Right.
So I think that is more important, and I think in that sense, I think even central bank is moving away from this more regulatory aspect in trying to do more financial consumer protection.
Sure.
And they've just brought in this legislation called the Financial Consumer Protection Regulation, which is trying to do that. But I think there again, implementation is key. You need to have the proper frameworks. You need to have help people to understand what their rights and obligations or rights and the rights are, as well as for the lender what their responsibilities are, and to ensure that the lending practices are such that it benefits that it doesn't exploit the borrower.
And also these systems won't take into account the polymudalalis.
So that is what this microfinance, so the original microfinance bill was only in relation to those who were registered microfinance institutions, but ultimately there were very few microfinance institutions that registered. So this, I think, is trying to be broader and take into account, other anyone who's lending institutions or microfinance lending institutions. The issue is that there are thousands of lending institutions. How is an institution going to regulate or trying to supervise these thousands of institutions? It's not something that is very practical. The more practical thing, or the more thing that will be more beneficial, is to help the borrower really understand and to be more careful and conscious when they are borrowing, because actually there has been huge. I mean, if you look at the UNDP's vulnerability index, one of the key areas of vulnerability was in terms of indebtedness.
Yes.
And so that is an area that really needs to be addressed, and I think this is something that central banks and even the government has to take really seriously.
So 55.7% of the population grapples with multidimensional vulnerability, deprived of at least 3 out of 12 indicators covering education, health, disaster, living standards, as per Sri Lanka's first multidimensional vulnerability index launched last September. Dr. Roshan, in terms of staying on course, the economic reform agenda, what more needs to be done? I think you're the 5th economist I'm meeting this week. So these conversations are being had. There are a multitude of panel discussions happening with fabulous experts across the board. But ultimately, are the policymakers making the right decisions which are beneficial towards the people, for the people?
Yeah, so I think we can all sort of we might all disagree on little bits of the finer points. But I think overall we all agree in on the direction that we are going in, because I don't think that what is the alternative. When you spoke to all those economists, did they come up with an alternative to what we're doing now? Because there's no real alternative. But I understand that there are some things that maybe we can do better, and some things that maybe we can carry on the way we are. But I think the important point is that to understand that we are in our 17th IMF program. So from 1965 to now we have been in 16, and this is our 17th program. And if you look at the last, if you look at all our programs, and particularly look at the last 4 or 5 programs, which I'm getting some students to look at now, because I want them to understand, you see that there are common themes in all of them. So why is it that we have continued to come up with the same old, have to go back and do the same old reforms multiple times? It's because we have never really completed the reform process. Once we stabilize up to a point, because we feel that we are out of the woods, we then,
chill out.
Put aside this, the continuing with the reforms, because reforms are hard. It's not that it's easy. We know, people should understand that reform process is hard. So we'd rather not do the hard things, and then we go back to, business as usual, which means that in another 2 or 3 years we're back to where we were. The issue with this, the current time, is that we've never faced such a we've never been so badly off, or we've never gone to such depths, or the economy has never gone. So I think we need to understand that this time we really don't have a choice. We have to push through. We have to push through the reforms, ensure that we complete it, and not just the macroeconomic reforms. We also need to put in the reforms that will make the economy grow, and those are a lot of the structural reforms that we talk about. But what I also would like to say is these reforms take time to really feed through and to really have the impact on the economy. So if you look at, monetary reforms, happened very quickly, and we were able to stabilize inflation. But some of the other reforms are going to take time, and because there is a time lag, there will be people who will be affected by the reforms, and that's why it is very important that we put in place a good. We protect the people who will be most vulnerable in these reforms, and I think that is something that people need to understand. The policymaker needs to understand, because otherwise you're not going to get buy-in for these reforms, and people are going to get very because people are impatient. They want things to happen very quickly, but we have to understand that none of these things are going to happen quickly. It's going to take time for the fruit of all these reforms to actually materialize. And in the meantime, we need to protect these people, because that we don't allow them to fall through the cracks, and then bringing them out again and helping them once the economy stabilizes would be you might not be able to bring them back into the economic activity.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Roshan Perera. Thank you for your perspectives. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good night.